Our first speaker, and this CV is impeccable. I'm sure I'll miss something out when introducing our next speaker in David Crawford. He's got a lot of experience. He's going to share with us the lessons for people aspiring to succeed in the corporate world. He's one of the most prominent executive directors and non-executive directors in Melbourne. He attended Melbourne Uni, completed a Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Law. He's a partner and national chairman of KPMG in 2001, and after more than 30 years' service, he's been on many different boards. He was a member of the International Board of KPMG, a chairman of the International Professional Indemnity Insurance Committee for KPMG International. His professional capacity as a partner of KPMG, he has specialised in working in the restructuring of companies in financial difficulties. His directorships have included being chairman of BHP Billiton, Lendlease, Foster's, National Foods, Westpac, Australian Ballet, and Vice President for the Melbourne Cricket Club. We all have a high interest in sport in this room, so he's conducted reviews of the structure and governance of AFL, soccer in Australia, and the Australian Cricket Board. He was also chairman of the committee appointed by the federal government to report on the future of sport in Australia. Please welcome David Crawford to the stage.
Thanks very much, Mike. And can I just say that's by far the warmest welcome I've ever had in attending anything to do with Xavier. I used to attend reasonably frequently, but usually I ended up at the bottom of a pack and in a losing side. So thank you for making me feel welcome this time. As you've suggested, Mike, I'm going to try and, in the short time available, talk about three aspects of my career over the last 40, 50 years. And they're directed really to try and bring out that one's life is often in your own hands and how you're going to progress. I actually started off my career after having done a university course thinking that I was going to become an accountant. How dull. And it proved to be dull, but I was fortunate that in that role I met a number of very interesting people, one of whom was Lindsay Fox, who most of you will have heard of. Lindsay had, at the time we became introduced, had just become the chairman of the St Kilda Football Club. But Lindsay, whenever he took on a new role, always brought in his accountants to review the role that he's taken on to see if there were any skulls in the cupboard. And of course he found out that at St Kilda there were several of these issues. And that led to him asking me if I would take on the role to become receiver and manager of St Kilda, which became the first of my forays into sporting organisations. It resulted in me moving quite away from what you might call normal accountancy work, but it opened up a number of wonderful opportunities. I became, as a result of being the receiver for St Kilda, I ended up sitting around the board table of what was the predecessor to the AFL. And sitting around that table brought a number of very interesting possibilities. I sat in those days, reviews of players who were up before the tribunal. And I saw what happened in watching the tribunal. That led on to becoming involved in reviewing a number of the clubs of the league and led to a significant change in the way clubs administered themselves. all issues that I had never ever thought about dealing as a chartered accountant. But it opened up my mind to the opportunities that are available to you. So the first learning I would say I would suggest to the younger people here today is that you should take the opportunities that are presented to you. Don't be afraid of new opportunities. And as a personal view, I was not a good student at school. Some would say I'm still not a good student, but I was not a good student at school. I used to get accused by my parents for not doing my homework appropriately because I loved my sport so much that I stood up next to the mantelpiece doing the homework that I was set and didn't take my studies sufficiently well enough. But as time has gone on, what I've found in my career going forward is that if you pay attention and if you listen carefully to the people you're working with, you will be learning something new every day, and that will be very valuable for you as you progress your career. So I would strongly urge that you take the advantage to educate yourselves really for your lifetime, but at least educate yourself well as you are doing your courses and then hopefully post-courses so that you are keeping yourself up to speed with what goes on. And if you do that, you will find that opportunities do come before you and you're able to take giant steps in progressing your career. Now, if I turn away from the sporting world, although I could talk about that for some time, particularly looking at some of the reviews that have been done with sport in Australia. But what I'd like to focus on next is what makes your decision to move forward. And what I'd like to think about is if you were contemplating, for example, working in the field of commercial law, you'd probably be asking you might even be asking, bearing in mind what's been hitting the press in the last week about being involved in corporates, why would I ever want to do that? But assuming that you are wanting to take on a role in the commercial world, you've got to find out exactly what does that mean. I'm currently asked several times a week, what's the secret to getting onto working on a board? The question I would ask of people today, bearing in mind what's happened recently in the press, why would you ever want to join a board? But assuming you do want to join a board, what do you have to offer if you are contemplating such a course of action? As I said before, your qualifications are very important, but they're not the only things. You will not be appointed to a board just because you have a qualification. That is just a starting point to being considered for appointment to these roles. What needs to be presented to any employer is something that you can offer that company or that employer which will be beneficial to the company. They want to employ people who can make a difference to their organisation, and they're very concerned to ensure that you are going to be working for them. And when you're going to the interview, they're not wanting to hear you demonstrate how smart you are and how good you would be. They're wanting you to be able to show empathy and understanding for the business that you are hoping to join. It's a question of you being able to demonstrate to the company what you have to offer. it's important that you can do that in a way that will add value to them. One of the things is they want somebody who is able to deal with what we call smelling the smoke under the door. There are people who have plenty of good qualifications around, but who are incapable of being able to address the question of what's happening out there, what is really occurring in the business world, and what do you need to bring to the business to make people think that you are going to be valuable for them. It's important that those sorts of things are taken account of. Now, I made a list of what I call the attributes of a good director. They must be experienced across a range of activities and businesses. They need to be financially literate, and they need to have an understanding of risk management. Now, we've been hearing all about those issues during the last few weeks as the Royal Commission is underway. It's necessary for you, if you're going to become a good director, is that you have good analytical ability, you have the capability to listen, to absorb and to understand, and fundamentally to identify what is relevant and what is not. There's an old saying, there's the 80-20 rule. You don't need to understand everything to the nth degree, but most times, if you have an 80% understanding of the issues that you're addressing, then you're going to be well on the way to having a very good understanding and a valuable contribution to make to the organisation. One needs to understand what one's own weaknesses are and what one's own strengths are. And you need to be wary of what you're being told. Can you accept that? Does it sound correct? Or is it something that you need to ask further questions about? Never be afraid of asking questions. The issue that I learned very early on in life is when I was chairing creditors' meetings, people would stand up and ask one question. Rarely did they ask two questions, and most times they were embarrassed and then sat down. Now, you don't learn anything if you have questions but you don't ask them and you don't query the people who are presenting to you. Be quite comfortable in asking questions, and you can ask questions not in a critical way, but in a way which can draw out the argument and make sure that all of the issues are put forward on the table. I say one of the learnings, I think it was in the blurb that went out first, is that you don't learn anything when you're talking. If you're listening, then you have a chance of hearing what the other person is saying, and you have a chance of learning. So be careful about that. You don't learn by talking, but what you need to be able to do is speak when you have something to contribute. I well recall in one of the big court cases that I was involved in many years ago, we had one of the major barristers appearing for us, and we had a 5-day hearing in the Supreme Court. And our barrister didn't talk on day 1, 2, 3 or 4. Then he stood up on the 5th day and he asked one question, and that question destroyed the opposition. That was a barrister who was prepared to sit quietly, listen to all the arguments, and then present his argument to the court, which won the case. A good lesson I learned a long time ago. The probably going a little bit over time. Some of the things I've learnt over time in working through a number of the different organisations that I've had the pleasure of representing is that you are always coming across and dealing with different people from different walks of life who have different understandings, may have different cultures, may have different views about what is right and wrong. One of the messages that I'd like to leave with you is that you need to be true to yourself. You need to make sure that you stick to your values through thick and thin. Integrity in business is fundamental to your ongoing success. And I often used to say to the partners at the firm I was at that integrity is like virginity. Once lost, you never get it back. And that's a very good precept to think about as you're progressing in your career. On that, I wish you every success as you progress. Thank you very much.